Unleash your inner strength to beat fatigue with Patriarch's liquid oxygen. Pure spring water, oxygenated for ultimate vitality. Refresh, detox, and empower your freedom-fighting spirit. Boost your immune system with Patriarchs, the oxygenated water designed for resilience and vitality in every sip. Use my special discount code as well to get 10% off any Patriarchs order. That's patriarchs.us/Tron. I do earn a commission every single time you do make a purchase, and it goes directly towards assisting this show. Listeners of the Randomness of Nothing podcast, Rashad Woods here, and thank you for your time as always as a dedicated listener. I think this episode is going to resonate with a lot of business professionals on this episode, and I've been really looking forward to this interview. He is the digital nomad expert. He is the gentleman that tells people when they're between 40 and 60 that if you feel stuck or if you had felt like you've peaked, it is not the end. It is a very great opportunity for a beginning. Jamie Sylvian, thank you very much, sir.
Rashad, pleasure to be here. How are you doing?
That's fantastic. You have one of those stories that I think resonates with somebody who's making that coffee, who's sitting back and saying, doing that self-assessment and wants to see where their life is headed. So please share your story and your expertise.
Yes, so name's Jamie Sylvian. I am not a digital nomad as such because there's a difference. I'm an executive nomad. And the difference is, and I can say this because I have a niece, Rashad, who's 25, and she's a digital nomad. She spends her life flitting around Bali looking for free Wi-Fi.
I apologize for the misnomer.
That's fine, because there are so many overlaps. And honestly, I was a digital nomad before I became an executive. So, you know, it's not an insult by any means. I'm an executive nomad, and I own executivenomad.com. And the difference between the two is simply that I do all the traveling. Last year, I think I was in 9 different countries. I've just spent the winter in Malta. I'm now in Bulgaria because we're coming out of ski season into the springtime, and the springtime is beautiful. This part on this side of the world, Bulgaria and the Balkans, is stunning at this time, you know, for the spring. The difference is that I work at boardroom level. I've worked for British Gas in the UK. I've worked with large publishing companies, venture capital businesses, all at board level or upper management level and above. And I charge the fees of an advisor in that space. And that means when I do travel, I'm not looking for free Wi-Fi in Bali. You know, I go for 2 months to a nice place. I get a nice apartment, and 20 minutes after I land at the apartment, I'm ready for business. I'm in exactly this environment. I'm working on consulting. I'm working on coaching. I'm working on as a non-executive director. I'm setting up workshops. So as long as it's in this environment, an online environment, I still do it. And I work at the very highest level I can, but I travel the world to do it. And that's what Executive Nomad is about, the framework that I've developed.
Well, you know, like I said, I apologize for the miswording on my end. I even had it written down, and you basically still went to the same wording I'm used to. I saw one of your interviews, and it was with a woman by the name of Lisa Urbanski, and it talked about how burnout can actually be a gift and that people are somewhat institutionalized. And I say that because you know, people reach a certain peak level in their career, particularly if they reach executive levels. Those are very ambitious people. They're very driven people, and they've accomplished many things. Having said that, it's very structured and rigid at that level. So what did you discover at an early age that allowed you to be the executive nomad that you are?
So I was following the executive path. And I was at the same time wanted to travel. I was kind of, as my girlfriend at the time said, I was very much a Gemini. I wanted all of the corporate stuff, the flashy watch, the car, the house. I wanted all of the toys. But I also was a little bit of a hippie, and I would go off in the other direction. I want to travel for months at a time. But you know, you're sort of you're encouraged to be heading into the corporate world by your parents, by your schooling, by college and university, and so on. And so that's where I ended up. And I ended up at a very young age running a business, and as a partner in a business, and we worked with corporates. And I continuously saw people who would be younger than me now, but were a lot older than me then. And I could see that they had everything on the face of it, but they were so stressed out, Rashad, and burnt out, and they just they were just sort of stuck in their role. And I that really scared me at the time. And then I just by chance, I came across a book by a guy called W.G. Hill, and it was called Perpetual Traveler, which was the precursor to Digital Nomads. And it spoke about a way of life that you could live in one place, have a company in another, your clients around the world. And this was pre-internet. It was a couple of years before the World
That's
Wide Web.
amazing.
Actually. Yeah, right. So it was fax machines. It was deals by letter, contracts in the post. And
Going to the hotel lobby, right, and just like faxing over, you know.
Exactly that. So I really loved the idea, but it was hard work. You know, I remember getting so excited when I found an internet cafe when I was traveling through Spain, thinking technology had peaked.
Yeah.
So
right.
yeah. So but that's what I got into. So when I started to sort of mix the two. So I was living in Spain, but traveling back to London where my business was. I had a virtual office address, so it wasn't a real address. I didn't go there to work. It was just a central London address. And I would fly into London and I would stay there for a week and then I'd fly back to Spain. And then you kind of get to a point where you say, well, if I can be in Spain, I could also be in Italy, I could also be here and I could also be there and so on. And that's how I started to develop this thing out. I honestly didn't give it a name. Clearly, I wasn't a digital nomad because it wasn't digital at the time. I was more of an analog nomad. Yeah. But over time, as you know, as things progressed, and I was more and more traveling. I went off to as life became easier, technology wise. I would work with companies in London, but I was living in Chiang Mai in Thailand.
Right.
I would work with companies in Baltimore while I was living in Spain. And it became more and more online. It became more and more a business style. I thought this is an actual thing. This is what I can do, and you know, to create my life and just live wherever I want, work where I'm inspired.
Did you find what was the reception early for clients when that was your business model? You know, what was the reception?
It was tricky at first. So I lost deals, and I do remember specifically speaking to a very nice deal I was working on with a publishing company in London. And everything was fine until the conversation. I said something like, "Oh, I'm GMT +2, you know, time zone." And the guy that I was putting the deal together, he said, "Well, where are you?" And I said, "I'm in Spain." He said, "Oh, all right." And clearly it was pouring down. You could see the rain in his backdrop, and I was in the sunshine, Rashad. And he just said, "Well, look, next time we're in London, let me know and we'll get together." We were at signing stage. And I lost the deal. Yeah. And that kind of went right along to COVID, where people would say, where are you? You know, what are you doing? That was always the first question on conversations like this. Yeah. And when they realized I was in a different country, that became, not always, but sometimes became a problem. Since COVID, never a problem.
Normal.
At all. Don't even get asked anymore. You know, this is a very normal way of doing business now, which is lovely.
Yeah. And what I thought was fascinating about that was that, you know, you have people now where I always find it funny when people are ahead of the curve and then things become normal, right? So, you know, it's always been available. Like I remember Skype, I'm 43, and Skype was available when I was in college. And that was, you know, almost 25 years ago. So the idea that somebody could have webcasting calls were always there. But at the time, people only assumed it was just so a lot of foreign students were calling their family back home. And here that was a business model sitting people in their faces, right, to do those type of things. Yeah. Is there a difference because you are the executive nomad when it comes to doing business with a U.S. client, and then you have time zone differences? Maybe there's some sort of currency differences. Like how different does it become to also pitch your services too? Is it word of mouth?
So I do get a lot of word of mouth deals, but actually I have a U.S. phone number. Mm-hmm. And that's wherever I'm in the world, it's a VoIP number. It rings. It's like Skype, you know, the modern Skype.
Yeah.
I do work with companies in Canada. I have a Canadian number. I have a central London phone number.
Wonderful.
So I'm sort of meeting them where they are. So even now I have I've had a London business address for 20 odd years. Never changed. Yeah. I've been there probably 3 times because something was sent there by accident, you know, to actually go and get something. But it's just, I never have to go there. Time zone, yes, but usually I'll do meetings sort of their morning, my afternoon, every now and again. Right. If I'm in Europe, it's fine. If I'm in Asia, it gets tricky because of the very big time differences.
For sure.
You've got to meet them where they are. And I charge, if I'm working with an American client, I'll charge in US dollars. That's it. And and I take the hit if there is a hit when the exchange rate happens. I just use wires.com. That means I've got every currency that I ever need.
Sure.
And so everything, as long as you you need to make a few steps to go towards them. As long as you do that, what they're paying me for, Rashad, is not where my bum is. They're not paying me to be in a room. They're paying me for the experience that I've got in strategic communications, which I've done for many, many years. So that's what they're paying for. They know my results. They know where I'm coming from, and everybody accommodates everything else.
Are there particular industries that you specialize in when it comes to your clientele base?
No, because my consulting stuff, to be clear, I'm mainly focused on Executive Nomad as a brand and teaching other people now. But for the last 20 odd years, I was in comms.
Understood.
No, I specifically didn't go after industries. I found myself in the online gaming industry because somebody suggested talk to Jamie. So I was in the so I did workshopping, I did mentoring. So I used to go I spent a lot of time in Malta and in Gibraltar and in Cyprus, because that's over this part of the world where the gaming companies are.
It's weird. I've noticed that, right? Like, it's some centralized over there.
Yeah, because it's tax advantages. It's great for these small islands who don't have a lot of ways to make money. That was an absolute gift for them. But that means I found myself there. So I was in Gibraltar a lot, working with $1 billion companies at the boardroom level, at owner level or board level. And I would either go down there for once every couple of months and do a workshop, literally in the room with people. And then I would mentor some of those people who were kind of not getting it, and they needed communications work. Excuse me. So they needed communications help. They needed work. Some advice and stuff that went on. So I worked with VC companies, venture capital companies, helping other businesses buy other businesses. It's just about communication. So the writing, putting the comm strategy together, which is all beautiful on my laptop. I don't have to be in any room. Well,
and I think, and this segues into my next question. So you have, now that you're helping executives, right? And you have, I hate to stereotype people. You have the guy or woman who's had it all. They graduated in the top 5% of their class. They have their MBA or their master's. They've done very successful financially, personally, and yet they still feel empty, or they still feel trapped, or they still feel burnt out. Right. And they're looking at it and sit back and saying, despite all of my accomplishments, I still have to be in these amount of meetings. My schedule's still dictated by this. And what's next for me? So when you have those conversations with those successful people, what's the intro call like? And it's got to be some raw emotion that really comes out, because they kind of have to put on an act at their current profession, but then they get to be the real you when they talk to you.
It's absolutely fascinating. I have spoken to just some of the highest people, $500,000, million plus in salaries. Yeah. And you take them out of a very, very boxed arena that they're working in, the nice office and, all of that stuff. And they're quite lost. Once they're going through the process, and they don't know what to do without that corporate badge, which has defined them for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And so they step outside of that and they say, now what? And I've spoken to people who thought, well, I thought I'd get a franchise. I thought I'd start a business. I thought, they're looking at things because they're just not sure, because the entrepreneurial world, the solopreneur world is vastly different. It's neither better nor worse. But if you've been in a corporate world, when you wanted printing done, somebody down there did it. When you wanted some accounts done, somebody over there did it. Once you become doing your own thing, then that changes. But what they're really, really afraid of is losing relevance, because they've got the relevance of their badge. Because their inbox is funny. People are coming to them saying, how do I do this? How do I do that? So with Executive Nomad, with the framework, Rashad, that I put together, is I call it rewire, repackage, and repurpose. And rewire is where we go into, in a conversation like this, we're looking for some wins, losses, and lessons in their career. Right. Because they can't, this is a real challenge for people, because they did it just as a part of the job. So they're not seeing it in and of itself. There's, so we extract that and say, that thing you did, you were working for a logistics company and there was a takeover and it was all messy, and this thing you did, that is a consulting business. That's a coaching business. That's a mentoring business. That's a workshopping business. Let's extract it out. Once you've got that, once you do that, it's really interesting mindset, mind shift, is that they go, I could do that.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you are employed or recently found yourself at the exit interview, I have a podcast for you. I'm Mark Carey, the host of the Employee Survival Guide, a podcast all about work and working. As a seasoned employment attorney, I will share with you information your employer definitely does not want you to know about and more. Stop getting screwed over by your employer. Get the tools of the legal trade to fight and win against your employer. Listen to the Employee Survival Guide by clicking the link in the show notes. Enjoy and be well.
And all of a sudden, that relevance still stays there. So you say, right, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're giving you a series of services that you can package, which is the second part. You actually give them a name, because ringing somebody up and saying I'm a consultant, well, there's a million of them. Who cares? But when you actually give your what you do an actual name, so I'm the logistics oversight guy. I'm the gaming company strategist. I'm the something. Right. Yeah, that's what they see. And the third bit, so that gets people excited, right? The third bit is simply to repurpose all of that so you can do it into different industries, which is, in answer to your earlier question, did I specialize? No, I didn't. That's why.
Well, because process, there's a reason why people can jump from, Coca-Cola to Unilever to Procter and Gamble. It's because they understand process, they understand strategy, they understand people. So that in itself is already 80% of what you need to know, right? And then it becomes, because, for all intents and purposes, those are all, publicly traded companies. So the profit and loss statement all reads exactly the same, right? Yep. You just have to be able, and at the end of the day, you're just trying to refine whatever processes and remove any flaws, so to speak, that are currently in said process. What I find fascinating is, because I think this really hits home with a lot of people, because, when you'll look on LinkedIn and you'll see people at a certain age and now younger, in particular, that are like, for sure. And then, they're like, oh my gosh, I kind of need to, break the glass kind of deal and see what's available out there. And maybe you don't know this, but I just have to ask this question. How is the business world responding to people who are doing things like this? Now you could be in college and you can sit back and say, I don't want to do this internship. I want to get with Jamie early in my life. How do businesses adjust to this new normal?
Okay, now that's a really good question. And it's the value of the executive nomad is, so I'm going to answer what you're asking in two ways. The value of an executive nomad is pattern recognition. When I'm in with a new client and I'm talking to them about what their problem is, their challenges, whatever, I can help them because I've seen it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? I've seen what they've done, and they haven't. They're going, well, how on earth do we get out of this mess? And I'm thinking, right, I know exactly what to do.
You know exactly.
That's the value. Yeah. So when you go back to somebody who, the intern and what have you, the trick now, if they're doing that, is for the next couple of years is to get their network going, because the network is your easiest place to position yourself as an executive nomad, because you can they already know you, they know what you can do. You've got their phone numbers and all that. So we're looking at, for me, 40 plus is the right place to be. And it changes, the service you offer changes in that arc from 40 to 60, 65.
Correct.
But when you're younger, you can start laying the groundwork so that, you don't have, there's no age for this, and you don't have to travel the world doing this. You can do it from your kitchen table. But if you want the executive, that's the executive bit. If you want the nomad bit, that's when you're going to need to sort of work it all out, how this is going to work for you. So it's answered in two ways, if I did that right.
Yeah. And because I think that, if anybody who's gone on LinkedIn and you see some of these people, who have high level credentials, I think they would benefit for your services. So I hope people who are listening, with the ebbs and flows of how life operates, I would encourage you all to reach out to Jamie, because I think that if you are lost or stuck and you're at a certain age and skill set level, like I'll see some of these people and, high level UX developer and high looking for, director position. Like, people have to realize that the higher the scale of pay, the less available positions.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's
and
just
ageism
true.
is a thing. Ageism
Real.
Is a thing. Really, people
100%.
really struggle with it. Yeah.
100%.
And that's the answer is don't. Sorry, please, Karen.
No, go ahead, because we're going back and forth. This is great.
So the answer to ageism is to use age as your superpower, and the way to do that is to call yourself an executive nomad or become something that gets a benefit of that, and that is pattern recognition. You say, well, you can. I encourage everybody to write a book, because if I was up against you trying pitching for a deal, Rashad, you're a younger guy. You've got a lot of advantages that I don't have. But when you hand over your business card and I hand over my book, I'm in.
Right. Like, you ever seen You ever seen Goodwill Hunting? You ever seen Goodwill Hunting?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's like when Matt Damon got like to that debate with the guy at the bar because the guy was trying to impress the
That's right.
girl, and then and then Matt Damon completely like washes the guy because he knew he was
Decimated him.
right. And then like that's the business card versus the book, right? Like it's
exactly that.
So I laughed at that one. It's funny because in the course of doing this podcast, people have asked me to write a book, and what's weird about it is I've hesitated because I didn't think I was worthy of writing a book because I'm like, why would I write? But now that you mention that, you could be the podcast. Like I'm literally going to reach out to the person that's been emailing me a half dozen times now after this call. Be like, I should write a book because then it's like I'm the podcaster with a book. Like I think people are selling themselves short of their actual potential because they think they have to be at a certain stage to do certain things.
Yep. And also the difference is, and this is really important. This is why anyone watching and listening should think about writing a book, is because I am now the Executive Nomad. That's an incredibly powerful brand in and of itself. Yeah. And I built out as I'm building out the brand itself. I own the .com, I own the .us, I own the .canada, I own all of that brand. So I have become synonymous with the Executive Nomad, the Executive Nomad, and that in and of itself. But that's just my brand. Anyone can create a brand and sort of and build themselves around it, because then all of a sudden everyone knows you. Anyone in your space, you're in the logistics space, you're in the engineering space, but you're positioning yourself there. You're the guy who wrote the book. You're the guy who's on the podcasts. You're the guy who's doing all that stuff. All of a sudden, the doors start opening. I do probably 5 or 6 podcasts a week now, and most of them are inbound to me, asking me if I'll do it. Yeah. That never happened before I started working on all the Executive Nomad as a brand, rather than just Jamie the consultant.
I think that when the world came to a screeching halt 5 years ago, that it made people do a reassessment of where exactly, here you were ahead of the curve. And then next thing you know, everybody's like, what's next? How can it really can happen? When you're a software developer, for example, all you need is reliable internet and the platform that you're doing something for.
Yep.
Right. And then, unless you're, unless you're doing something cooking, right. Or a lot of things have become digitized. Right. I'm paraphrasing. Right. Yeah. So obviously, I'm not going to dismiss every profession that's out there, but for all intents and purposes.
Oh no, but I mean, in this context, it would be very difficult to be an executive nomad with a trowel and some bricks. I get that. But also, I'd be terrible.
Oh my gosh. And so it's funny because, I've had the fortunate distinction of starting this podcast, and, the one thing that I kept trying to figure out was like, what can I dive into, and then when you do a checklist of all the things you can do and you can't do, and then the can't starts getting really big, and then you're like, but I like to talk and I'm fascinated about what people do. And that just kept coming up all the time, like every time. Yeah. And then I was like, why don't I just talk about people about what they do for a living and see how that goes from there? And, so I would encourage people, find one good thing that you're good at.
Yeah. Rewire. That's the point. Yeah. Right. And then just for anybody's use, I've just finished building out an AI program that's based on all of my experiences that will be on my website in the next couple of days. And that, if you just put in some of your career details, and it will tell you what you can do as a coach, as a consultant, as a non-executive director. It will actually give you the groundwork for your next stage, if that's what you want.
I've had some incredible guests, but this one resonates a little bit differently. And, I say that very respectfully because, this is one of those ones where if you're fortunate enough to live a long life or, get past a certain age and have your faculties intact, you're going to be asking these questions about yourself, right? And you're going to be sitting back because I think, you're in Europe, I'm in the States, but I think universal principles are the same where you're programmed in elementary and then high school and then post-secondary or college that this is all you're supposed to do. And then you're supposed to play by the rules, so to speak. And then the rules will work itself out as long as you do just that.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And it takes a powerful person such as yourself to sit back and say, life doesn't start. You're more controlled than you think that you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole executive nomad came up as a thing because I met a guy in a bar in Neo Marmaris in Greece he was 54. He'd lost his job. He had money. That wasn't his problem, but he was completely unanchored, untethered. He didn't know what was next. And we started chatting because he heard me on the phone when I was working with a venture capital company in Edmonton in Canada. I was on the phone sitting in this restaurant in Greece, and we got talking. He didn't even think it was a thing that you could do, and I said, I've done it forever. So we were a couple of bottles of wine in, Rashad, before we knew what that we actually had something to talk about.
Yeah.
But that's how it started.
I think that I'm so honored that you're sharing this message across, and for the purpose of the show, certainly not for your success, but for the purpose of this podcast, where can people find the Executive Nomad, Jamie Sullivan?
ExecutiveNomad.com. Nice and easy.
Yeah. Perfect. And so I would encourage people, whatever stage in life, whether you're thinking or whether you're at that stage, that to get his book, visit his website, listen to his podcast, episodes that he's had, because this is a message that's going to resonate. You're never going to be the youngest in any room. And at some point, if you're fortunate enough to get older, you may want to take these words of wisdom. So I got to tell you, this is the top of the list for me. I'm really, really honored.
I'm so pleased. I'm really pleased. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you very much for being on the Randomness of Nothing podcast, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rashad. It was a pleasure.